Jordan Peterson and Matt Dillahunty had a discussion, or it might be a debate recently. I'm not sure which it is. There was an event, and they were both in it. And the needle drop, Anthony Fontano, tweeted this video. I want to share it with you. For those of you who don't know, Matt Dillahunty is from the Atheist Experience, which I think is a local show in Houston, is it? I think it's somewhere in Texas. And it's an atheist call-in show. It's a pretty interesting show. I like the format of it, where they just kind of shoot the shit with whoever calls, and they discuss issues of theism, deism, atheism, and stuff like that. And of course, Jordan Peterson is now everybody knows who Jordan Peterson is. He's a guy who kind of rose to fame online and kind of defines himself in this anti-social justice warrior way. So he's made a very lucrative career out of going after the goofy authoritarian kids on college campuses who like to deplatform people and censor people and whatnot. But he also kind of links in, along with that aspect of his ideology, he's also kind of like a self-help guru, if you will. Like, he has this book, 12 Rules for Life, and you get this sense that he's a self-help guru kind of character, and he also mixes in pretty conservative politics along with a religious worldview. So that's why this clip is interesting, because you get a sense of how Jordan Peterson really thinks. So here's Jordan Peterson and Matt Dillahunty talking about the issue of God.
They would be afraid of what we would lose if we lost religion. And I basically said, demonstrate to me any benefit.
Oh, you'd lose art and poetry and drama and narrative and story.
Are there no godless artists and poets?
Well, there are artists and poets who think they're godless.
So we might have crossed over into a problem area, because
no doubt.
I can't draw for crap, although I do draw during the show. But one of the individuals who came to the show the other night handed me something that she had spent a great deal of time drawing. She's a wonderful artist. I'm very grateful to get it. And, while I pretend to read minds on stage, I constantly acknowledge that I can't actually read minds. So I can't tell you whether or not she actually believes in a God, but I can tell you that I actually don't believe in a God, and I could write poetry.
But you act like you do.
Huh?
But you act like you do. That's why you didn't want to throw poor Sam off the stage.
No, now you're making a claim. Okay, so I'm telling you I don't believe there's a God, and your response to that is, I really do, because I have a moral sense. But my moral sense is utterly without any appeal to a God.
Explicitly.
Or implicitly.
See, what's interesting about a guy like Jordan Peterson is that he's managed to take these arguments that, you go back 5 years ago or 8 years ago online, and basically the entire online community was unified against shitty points like this. The idea that, oh, you're an atheist and you're moral? Well, then you just think you're an atheist, because really, you believe in God on some level, and that's why you're acting in a moral way. If this is an argument that was presented by Ken Ham, which, by the way, it is, he's made that point before. If it's an argument presented by Ray Comfort, by the way, it is, he's made that argument before. If it was an argument put forth by any creationist-type character or religious character, the entire internet would, spread their ass cheeks and shit all over the face of the argument and say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever fucking heard. But, Jordan Peterson has this remarkable ability to garner a giant crowd and following to his arguments, even when he crosses the line into the fundamentally absurd. And that's what this is. And, naturally there's going to be 1,000 people who come to this segment and say, oh, I'm mischaracterizing him, or I don't understand his argument, or whatever the case is. Listen, man, you go back and listen to that as many times as you want. You could take as much context into it as you want. At no point does it start to make more sense. So his point is, no, if you act in a moral, ethical way, you by definition are not an atheist. You, on some level, are a believer in God, and a Christian God at that. So you believe in Yahweh and Jesus in order to act in this moral sense. Listen, if you can't see the flaws in that argument, then you're not as bright as you think you are. Let's put it that way. Because that's a non-falsifiable claim. So in other words, if somebody says to Jordan Peterson, I'm religious, and that person acts in a moral way, he'll go, great, then you're moral because you're religious. But if somebody says to Jordan Peterson, I'm non-religious, and they act in a moral way, he goes, great, that's because you're actually religious whether or not you know it. So then there's nothing that can disprove that claim, which is fundamentally absurd because that means you hold it as an axiomatic truth. You hold it up as a claim of this, by its very nature, cannot be argued against. So no amount of empirical evidence, no amount of data, doesn't matter how much somebody insists on what they believe to him, he knows what you believe better than you know what you believe. You know, that idea, if it's ever used against him, everybody would rightly say, oh my God, you're strawmanning Jordan Peterson. But if he tells you what you believe, they're like, no, on some level, he knows better than you do about what you believe. No, he doesn't. So I do not believe in God. And I never would ever murder somebody, ever think about murdering somebody, would never assault somebody, would never rape somebody, would never steal. And he says, well, that has to be grounded in a Christian metaphysics in order for you to believe that. So on some level, you've bought into the Christianity. No, or, number one, my natural inclination is to not do those things because something on a very gut, visceral, innate level feels wrong with that. And this, before I ever had any teachings of Christianity, something felt wrong about that. So there's an innate moral structure to begin with. But on top of that, now that I'm an adult and I've thought through these issues, I can give you reasons why I act this way without making any appeals to, you know, zombie Jewish carpenters in the sky. So, you know, in my mind, morality really manifests itself as a mixture of, in my mind, the golden rule is one thing. I see the fundamental logic of the golden rule. I see how it's a rational way to act in the world. I don't want to treat other people as I wouldn't like to be treated. Now, that is decoupled from any religious conception of the golden rule. The idea of the golden rule existed before religions existed because it's a way to go along, to get along in society, to make everything go smoothly, and to make it so that there's no, I'm not creating unnecessary threats to my own life. And again, I'm also not treating other people as I wouldn't want to be treated. There's something about that it just on its face is a common sense position. It's a reasonable thing to do, and it is an ethical thing to do, and you could tell because it does the least amount of harm to the most people. So there's some mix of a version of utilitarianism mixed in with the idea of the golden rule, you know, mixed in with this idea of human rights that strikes me as what morality is and what ethics are. And you don't need to make appeals to the supernatural in order to believe this way and act this way in the world. And in fact, many other people have made the argument, and I think there's some truth in this, that if anything, the scarier thing, it's what Jordan Peterson is alluding to. The idea that, oh, you need to act moral because there's a God. So if you ask somebody, hey, why are you not rampaging and murdering people? And their answer is simply because I'm afraid of the punishment my sky daddy will give me when I die. Well, then that's actually a terrible reason that's a terrible reason to act morally. Because what you're saying is me acting morally is solely contingent on the space daddy metaphorically spanking me in the afterlife. Me going to hell and burning forever. Well, then the obvious problem arises. What if there is no space daddy and they are not going to fucking punish you in the afterlife? Which is the reality. There is no space daddy and there's not going to punish you in the afterlife. Well, the implication is, obviously, I would probably rape and pillage and fucking steal and act immorally in that scenario. If you tell me there's no God, what reason is there to act good? So that's what's scary. Somebody who the only thing holding them back from acting in an immoral fashion is this idea of this non-existent being. That's scary. That's somebody you don't want to hang out with. You know, but I think most people, even if they are religious, and you talk to them, they go, yeah, even if there isn't a God, so in other words, even if on some level they're agnostic, I would still act in this way where I treat other people like I want to be tweeted. I treat other people like I want to be treated because it's fundamentally the rational thing to do, the logical thing to do, the right thing to do, and all you need to do is understand the fundamental principle of treating others as you would like to be treated to get that. You know, to not do unnecessary harm in the world and inflict pain on people is enough for me. I understand that negative emotions are terrible. And so I wouldn't want to inflict negative emotions on other people because then I'm adding to the net harm in the world and the hurt in the world. And life's hard enough as is without my dumbass adding to somebody else's pain. But to him, it's like all this shit is like, that doesn't strike him as a compelling enough reason to act moral. To him, you need to invoke metaphysical bullshit. And listen, if you still want to defend him on some level, just take out his appeals to, God in a deistic sense, or in the Christian sense, the theistic Christian sense, and add in fucking Vishnu, or add in Allah, which means God, by the way, but add in the notion of Islam. Like, imagine, it's easy to imagine an Islamic scholar saying, well, no, you need Islam to be moral. It's just as stupid. What Jordan Peterson is saying is just as stupid as an Islamic scholar saying you need Islam to be moral. So, does he really believe that if you get rid of, or you really lose art, poetry, and drama, and narrative, as he calls it, if you get rid of religion? Because that's what he argued. He just said that. If you get rid of religion, you get rid of art, poetry, karma, and narrative. Or drama, not karma. I had my chicken scratched here. I mean, again, that would easily be disproven by pointing to all the non-religious, brilliant artists that existed. But then he reverts to, no, they just think they're non-religious. They're not actually non-religious. I mean, that's just really sad and dumb. I don't know how else to respond to it. Just take people at their fucking word, man. Take them at their word. Don't think you know better than they do. Because frankly, you don't. You don't. Way before I ever got any religious teaching whatsoever, I felt on some level that acting certain ways is wrong and immoral and unethical. And so there's much more evidence in my mind for innate moral principles, an innate moral structure in human beings. In other words, this is the Chomsky argument of, and he proved this with language, which adds even more credence to the argument, in my opinion. But the idea is, just like your eye it's a biological entity, and there you have the preconditions to have an eye, and your eye has capacities and it has limits. But the eye is something that's in your genetic structure. And by the same token, just like any other bodily system, biological system develops over time, morality is no different. Just because morality is not something you can touch, you could touch somebody's arm so you know it's an arm. You can touch somebody's foot or somebody's hair. Well, just because morality is not something you could touch doesn't mean that there's not an innate moral structure. And again, the reason why this is so compelling to me is because he proved that in language. The idea used to be you're a lump of clay and, the way you learn to speak is simply by absorbing the words around you from everybody else. And then as you grew up, you could piece together the words that you learned from other people and string together sentences. Well, it turns out that's not true because kids are able to string together much more complex sentences than things they had ever heard before. So if you're able to basically structure a sentence even when there's a lack of knowledge or the words necessary, well, then that shows that there's something else at play here. It's not just that you absorb from your environment and regurgitate. That proves there's an innate structure for language. And language, again, is also something you can't touch language, but it's a biological system. By the same token, morality. You can't touch morality, but it's a biological system. So there's capacities and there's limits. And, you know, sometimes there are aberrations and people who do get some sort of sick pleasure out of murdering people, but it's exactly that, a fucking aberration. The overwhelming majority of people do not feel on a casual Sunday night like, oh, it would be the right thing to do to go fucking bash somebody's head in with a sledgehammer. So in my mind, there's a tremendous amount more evidence of an innate morality or ethical code than there is for this idea that in order to act rational, in order to act in a moral way, you need appeals to old fairy tales from thousands of years ago. And I haven't even brought up the fact that in those books that he's referencing, in all these religious books, they don't just teach good things. You could take a 5th grader, sit them down and say, come up with their list of 10 things you should never, any human being should never do. And that 5th grader will come up with a better list than what the fucking 10 Commandments says. Because the 10 Commandments includes honor your mother and father. What if your mother and father are bad people? and they've abused you and they raped you? Like, what if that was the case? Don't make images to other gods. That's going to be on your list of top 10 things to never do. And then there's rape in the Bible. There's fucking slavery in the Bible. There's genocide in the Bible. They give exact instructions on how you're supposed to treat your slaves. So the idea that in order for a human being to act in a way that's moral, and in order to create beautiful art and poetry and drama, the idea that you need a fucking massively contradictory book from the Bronze Age in order to act that way is frankly absurd. And, this is what Jordan Peterson does. He sprinkles in a bunch of things that make sense, but then he slips in, his own political and religious ideology at the same time. And usually his political and religious stuff is just almost standard run-of-the-mill conservative opinion shit, just like Bill O'Reilly or just like Sean Hannity. So even though, and don't get me wrong, he's much smarter than those guys. There's no doubt about that. But he's equally wrong on these points as would be a guy like Bill O'Reilly. So don't get it twisted and don't sell your mind to a charlatan because you agree with other aspects of what he might say.